HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Struggle for Law in the Oceans, How an Isolationist Narrative Betrays America, by John Norton Moore, read by Bob Johnson. Publisher's note: this audiobook contains references to material present in the print and e-book editions of the book. Prologue. We are on the sidelines watching others assert their national interests, and we're not in the game. Admiral Patrick Walsh, retired, former commander of the United States Pacific Fleet. During the 1970s and 1980s, the United States led the world in negotiating one of the most important treaties in history, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. Through these negotiations, the United States was able to secure the largest area of maritime jurisdiction in the world, an area larger than the continental United States itself. This sea area, composed of an exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, gave our nation control over vast fisheries and oil and gas resources off our shores. The United States also prevailed in protecting navigational freedom on the world's oceans, including navigation through straits, so crucial for protection of our shipping and security interests. We joined with others in updating oceans law to protect the ocean's environment, an area covering more than 70% of the planet. The United States, then the leader in deep seabed mining for critically important seabed minerals of copper, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and rare earths, was recognized as having access to 4 deep seabed mine sites in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone in the mid-Pacific Ocean, each roughly the size of the state of Rhode Island, and each containing strategic minerals valued at approximately $250 billion. These mine sites, among the best in the world, were known in recognition of their American status as USA 1, USA 2, USA 3, and USA 4. The value of the strategic minerals in these 4 sites combined is an estimated $1 trillion. Further, the United States was the only nation in the world given a permanent seat on the Council of the International Seabed Authority, a small and carefully cabined agency designed to provide stable property rights for deep seabed mining in areas beyond the sovereignty of any nation. Unlike international agreements that affect domestic matters, UNCLOS relates solely to recognition of our oceans rights. And unlike international agreements that impose costly trade-offs, such as many trade agreements, UNCLOS granted the United States the largest economic zone, think fish stocks, and the largest continental shelf, think oil and gas, in the world, meeting all of our security objectives, including transit passage through, over, and under international straits for our naval ships and aircraft, including our SSBN nuclear submarines. We also succeeded in fully maintaining high seas navigational freedoms within the broad, new 200 nautical mile economic zones and in updating and reforming the regime of transit in the territorial sea. Brian McGrath, the lead author of the U.S. Navy's 2007 Maritime Strategy, captured the critical importance of this navigational freedom for the United States when he noted, "Freedom of the seas is the irreducible minimum condition necessary for global trade, the overwhelming majority of which travels by sea. Our prosperity is utterly dependent upon it." The United States also succeeded in these negotiations in adding an important new environmental regime, adding effective dispute settlement machinery for the oceans, and obtaining a new regime for the mineral resources of the deep seabed, providing needed property rights and assured access for American miners. The negotiations resulting in the Law of the Sea Convention were long and difficult, spanning more than a quarter century. Beginning as an exchange of diplomatic communications between the United States and the then Soviet Union in 1966 and 1967, principally negotiated in the 1970s with over 90% of the convention agreed to in an early 1975 single negotiating text and formally voted on in 1982, the convention entered into force in 1994. A principal sticking point, delaying entry into force for over a decade, was the regime for deep seabed mining in areas beyond national jurisdiction, which is Part 11 of the Convention. The Convention, when voted on in 1982, though meeting U.S. needs in every other sphere, was broadly deficient in creating a regime for seabed mining. Among other problems, fees were too high. There was a mandate for technology transfer, and there was no guaranteed seat for the United States on the Council of the Seabed Authority, while the then Soviets were assured a seat they controlled. President Ronald Reagan properly refused to commit the United States to the Convention until these and other deficiencies in Part 11, which he enumerated, were changed, and these changes were made by 1994, meeting all of the Reagan conditions. Following the adoption of the Reagan conditions, the President submitted the revised convention to the Senate for advice and consent. The convention was favorably reported out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in both 2003 through 2004 and 2007 through 2008, but was never voted on by the full Senate. The Foreign Relations Committee returned to hearings in 2012, largely at the initiative of Secretary of State Clinton, strongly supported by the American business and national security communities, but again, the convention never reached a floor vote. In each case, the progress towards Senate advice and consent was blocked by a false isolationist narrative against the convention. The mineral resources of the deep seabed are important strategically to the United States, quite apart from their economic value. The polymetallic nodules found on the abyssal plains contain nickel, copper, cobalt, manganese, rare earths, and other metals. The cobalt-bearing crusts found on the slopes of seamounts at depths of 1,500 to 2,500 meters contain cobalt, nickel, titanium, manganese, and possibly minor metals. The polymetallic sulfides found at seafloor spreading centers and subduction zones contain copper, zinc, and possibly gold and lead. These minerals are used by the United States in a myriad of industrial and security applications. Ronald Reagan observed in 1978 about the only one of these critical mineral deposits then known, that of polymetallic nodules. What they are after are metal oxide nodules that lie on the ocean floor as much as 3 miles deep. They have been photographed and they have been brought to the surface. We know they contain several metals and will run about $100 to the ton. In the Pacific area to be mined, the nodules are expected to yield 30% manganese, 1.4% nickel, 0.25% cobalt, and 1.9% copper. We presently depend on imports for most of these metals. Indeed, we are totally dependent on imports for manganese and cobalt, and 90% dependent for nickel. Copper isn't quite as critical. Still, we import about 15%. It is estimated the Eastern Pacific alone can provide enough of these metals to last the world for hundreds of years. In other words, the U.S. can become self-sufficient through deep-sea mining. In the context of these early observations of Reagan, it should be noted that cobalt is today of great importance for jet engines as well as rechargeable batteries for mobile phones and electric vehicles, and that most of the non-seabed production is in an unstable Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. Manganese is important for aluminum and steel production and lightweight alloys, and the top producer is China. Rare earth elements are important for guidance systems, lasers, radars, sonars, jet engines, fiber optics, wind turbines, cellular phones, and a host of other defensive, energy, telecommunication, transportation, and other uses. The principal producer and supplier of rare earths is China. Cobalt, manganese, and rare earth elements, all contained in the oceanic nodules President Reagan was discussing, are on the 2018 U.S. Geological Survey draft critical mineral list. And among those minerals not on the current critical mineral list, these deep ocean nodules from the important Clarion-Clipperton Zone, where USA-1, USA-2, USA-3, and USA-4 were designated, are estimated to hold more than 3.5 times the total of all land-based reserves of nickel, as well as vast quantities of copper. Not surprisingly, since the negotiations were favorable to the United States, the convention has been strongly supported by every president of both parties to have addressed the issue, and the entire executive branch of the United States, including the Departments of State, Defense, and Homeland Security. Particularly strong support has come from the United States Navy and Coast Guard, the oceans component of the American military, who fully see the importance of UNCLOS. The convention also has been supported by virtually every oceans industry in the United States, including the oil and gas industry, the shipping industry, the transatlantic cable industry, the deep seabed mining industry, and the National Chamber of Commerce, as well as principal environmental groups. But almost from the beginning, isolationists have presented false and misleading arguments against the convention. To this day, almost a quarter-century after the initial submission of UNCLOS to the Senate, these isolationists have so intimidated the Senate with their false narrative that the Senate has never proceeded to a vote on the convention, despite 2 occasions in which the convention has been favorably reported to the floor by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. This narrative has made the following arguments. The narrative claims that the convention will remove American sovereignty when the reality is that no sovereignty is lost. The United States quadruples its sovereign territorial sea and increases its offshore resource jurisdiction to an area larger than the continental United States itself. It urges deep seabed miners to work outside the convention when the reality is that 168 nations and the European Union support the convention as the only lawful modality for obtaining a deep seabed site. Our mining companies support the convention regime, and there is no chance that any American company will seek to mine outside the convention. No company will invest $2 billion to mine the deep ocean floor without security of legal tenure. The renegotiated convention regime meets all of the conditions set by President Ronald Reagan for United States support. Earlier efforts to create an international reciprocating state regime for mining failed completely, and the delay in moving forward on the convention has already cost the United States 2 of our 4 deep seabed sites, for a loss to date of $500 billion in value. Indeed, the Lockheed Martin Corporation, which has the only 2 remaining United States deep seabed sites, in a 2017 filing with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, cited continued delay in resolving the security of tenure issues given the lack of ratification of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea as a major reason for its delay in moving forward on USA-1 and USA-4. Lockheed, in the same filing, also pledged continued support for United States ratification of UNCLOS in its effort to obtain security of tenure for the 2 sites. The isolationist false narrative further urges that the convention will harm American security interests, when the reality is that every director of national intelligence, every chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and every Secretary of State has supported U.S. adherence to the convention. The Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard have been the strongest supporters of the convention, and the United States prevailed on every one of our security objectives in the negotiations. Non-adherence, however, continues to impose significant costs on American security interests, including our effectiveness in dealing with the important South China Sea and Arctic security interests, and in protecting our hard-won transit rights through, over, and under international straits. The narrative presents the convention as a third world scheme to turn the oceans over to an international agency, when the reality is that the convention recognizes the largest expansion of national sovereign rights in history, with its recognition of 200 nautical mile economic zones and broad continental shelves for coastal nations. Further, the negotiations leading to UNCLOS actually began in 1966 through 1967 with an exchange of diplomatic communications between the United States and the then Soviet Union, who were concerned principally with the protection of navigational freedom. The International Seabed Authority, ISA, far from an international agency to govern the oceans, has jurisdiction solely over mineral production from the deep seabed in areas beyond national jurisdiction, as was needed to provide property rights and security of tenure for deep seabed miners. No nation has sovereignty over the deep seabed beyond the economic zone and continental shelf. But it is this deep seabed beyond national jurisdiction where manganese nodules and polymetallic sulfides are principally found. So security of tenure for the billion-dollar operations to mine these resources from the ocean floor over a mile below the sea surface would not have been possible without an international agency capable of recognizing property rights in this deep seabed area. Even counting security personnel, secretaries, and drivers after a quarter-century of operation, the small international organization set up for this purpose has only 38 employees. Our nation is already a party to over 80 formally designated international organizations. The ISA is yet another small, functional organization that serves United States interests, and among other false and misleading arguments, the isolationist narrative claims that the convention would put 70% of Earth under the governance or taxing authority of the United Nations, when the reality is that no international entity created by the convention is under United Nations control, nor does the convention give the United Nations any governance or taxing authority. The costs to the United States of the isolationist narrative already have been staggering and are continuing. As a non-party to the convention, the United States has lost 2 of its 4 USA-designated deep seabed mine sites with a value of $500 billion in strategic minerals, and we are at risk of losing the 2 remaining sites at a cost of another $500 billion as our non-party status continues. In the meantime, China is sponsoring 5 deep seabed sites, the Russian Federation 3, France, Germany, India, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom are sponsoring 2 sites each, and a host of other nations including Belgium, Brazil, Singapore, and even the Cook Islands and Nauru are also claiming sites. Just considering the mineral-rich area of the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, China now has exclusive licensed access to over 85,000 square miles of the sea. Russia has over 57,000 square miles. The United Kingdom has over 50,000 square miles, and the United States has 0. Indeed, the International Seabed Authority, ISA, has licensed 31 contractors from convention state parties, while America has lost half its seabed sites, sponsors not a single contract, and is at risk of losing its 2 remaining sites. The United States is largely absent from government-funded research and resource evaluation programs on commercial-scale deep ocean mining programs that are active in Brazil, China, France, Germany, India, Japan, Korea, and Russia. As a non-party, the United States has effectively been absent from the table in the 20-plus years of development of the mining code for deep seabed minerals, a process now close to completion. On September 10, 2018, the International Seabed Authority submitted for comment its revised draft regulations on exploitation of mineral resources of the deep seabed. Embarrassingly for the United States, the American delegation to the ISA is relegated to the back row of meetings as a mere non-voting observer. When the authority held its 25th session in February and July of 2019 at Authority headquarters in Jamaica, reviewing the status of contracts for exploration as well as the critically important regulations for exploitation, the United States was again a mere non-voting observer. As a non-party, the United States also lags behind the Russian Federation, China, France, the United Kingdom, Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Cuba, India, Mexico, Palau, South Africa, and 66 other nations in submitting our extended continental shelf limits to the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, and we have no members on the Commission, while China and the Russian Federation do. Our non-party status has delayed our mapping of our extended continental shelf, which, in areas off Alaska, extends seaward over 600 nautical miles, and this delay means that it will be 2030 at the earliest before the Shelf Commission can provide a final and binding shelf for the United States. These and other harms to American ocean interests are costing jobs, technology, resources, and revenues for the nation. As a non-party, the United States has had no elected judge on the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, a tribunal strongly supported by the United States to protect freedom of navigation and which has already dealt with 26 important cases. In contrast, China and the Russian Federation, parties to UNCLOS, both have nationals serving as judges on UNCLOS, while Australia, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam were granted observer status to attend the hearings in the important Philippines/China-South China Sea arbitration. The United States, as a non-party to UNCLOS, was denied that status. Nor, as a non-party, did we contribute to the development of the rules and procedures of the Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, or the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. Our Navy and Coast Guard must argue from a position of weakness for freedom of navigation against the many global challenges they face when they invoke the Convention as protection against China, Iran, and other violators. They are told, "You are not a party." Indeed, with respect to the Strait of Hormuz, which is a crucial transit route for global oil supplies from the Persian and Arabian Gulf, Iran has officially stated that only states parties to the Law of the Sea Convention should be entitled to benefit from transit passage through straits. Ongoing oceans issues creating serious challenges for the United States are all made worse by our non-party status. China's illegal claims and actions in the South and East China Seas risk escalating conflict and are grave security challenges for the United States today. The melting of the Arctic ice cap is fundamentally changing the Arctic Ocean, America's fourth coast. Yet the United States cannot take action while the Russian Federation makes a major commitment to the region. An international conference scheduled to complete in 2022 is underway for a potential new intergovernmental agreement shaping conservation and utilization of the biological resources of the deep seabed and its spreading centers. In each of these and other ongoing oceans challenges, America's non-party status to UNCLOS inhibits our effectiveness. The isolationist false narrative assault on the Convention has kept the United States as a non-party in the company of Kim Jong-un of North Korea, Bashar al-Assad of Syria, and Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, while 168 countries in the European Union have become parties. This has relegated the United States to an embarrassing observer status in many of the most important negotiations about the oceans, a tragic reversal of U.S. world leadership in the negotiations leading to the Convention. And it has contributed to a sense from friend and foe alike that the United States is dysfunctional. Why, as the principal beneficiary of the UNCLOS negotiations, has the United States turned its back on its victory in achieving the largest area of maritime jurisdiction in the world, in obtaining transit passage through straits for our Navy, fully protecting navigational freedom for our commercial shipping, and even forcing a renegotiation of Part 11 of the Convention to achieve all of President Ronald Reagan's conditions for seabed mining. Nor does extension risk anything. Article 317 of the Convention permits states to withdraw on a year's notice with no cost. Throughout American history, the preeminent national interest of the United States in the oceans has been the protection of navigational freedom. Americans have fought and died for this principle in the Quasi-War of 1798 through 1800, the 1801 through 1805, and 1815 through 1816 Barbary Wars, the War of 1812, World War I, World War II, the Mayaguez incident in 1975, and the Persian Gulf in the 1980s. UNCLOS, through a hard-fought American negotiating success, has now written this navigational freedom into the DNA of the globe. Are we to permit a litany of isolationist falsehoods to undermine this freedom for which so many have died? The Joint Ocean Commission Initiative, widely regarded as the most prestigious national organization assessing United States oceans policy, has repeatedly urged U.S. accession to UNCLOS. The initiative's 2012 report card awarded the nation an F for failing to accede to the convention, saying, "Oceans and the activities that occur on and in them, both our own and those of other nations, are vital to our economy, national security, and the long-term health of the planet. It is critical that the Senate provide its advice and consent to accede to the convention to avoid further compromising our national economy, security, and conservation interests." Events changing the world as this work has moved from manuscript to final draft create even greater urgency for the United States Senate to provide advice and consent for the United States adherence to UNCLOS. For both the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine have dramatically increased the price of strategic minerals such as cobalt, copper, manganese, and nickel, minerals critical for both national defense and the transition to a more carbon-neutral world. As one example, the price of nickel soared to over $100,000 per ton in the immediate aftermath of the invasion of Ukraine, stoked by fears of loss of access to high-grade nickel from the Russian Federation. Yet the deep ocean nodules from the Clarion-Clipperton zone of the Pacific, where the remaining USA-1 and USA-4 mine sites are located, are estimated to hold more than 3 times the known worldwide land-based deposits of cobalt, manganese, and nickel, as well as vast quantities of copper. The estimated value used in this book of $250 billion of these strategic minerals in each of the remaining USA-1 and USA-4 mine sites is likely much too low for this new world. But going forward, strategic access to these minerals is likely even more important than their economic value. In this respect, China and the Russian Federation are licensed between them for at least 7 deep seabed mine sites in the mineral-rich Clarion-Clipperton zone, covering 142,000 square miles, while the United States, not yet a party to UNCLOS, is unable to license the remaining 2 USA mine sites negotiated in the UNCLOS process, and thus has zero national access to these strategic minerals of the deep seabed. As the manuscript for this book was at the publisher, China has received a license to a 5th deep seabed site, making it by far the nation with the greatest access to seabed minerals. If this is not enough in national access to these strategic minerals and taking advantage of the absence of the United States on the Council of the International Seabed Authority, ISA, China is pushing, within the ISA, to require future licensees to deep seabed mine sites to commit to the processing of the minerals from the newly licensed sites in China. Each passing month, our non-party status increases the risk that the United States will permanently lose access to these remaining 2 USA-designated sites. In fact, as of December 2021, a substantial portion of USA-1, One of the two remaining USA deep seabed mine sites has been turned into an Area of Potential Environmental Interest, APEI 13, where no activity, including exploration, can be authorized. As this recent action indicates, absent the United States.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?